On November 6, 1994, Revelle Balmain stands on the platform of Newcastle railway station, Australia. She cranes her neck, trying to catch sight of the approaching train. Jan eagerly awaits the arrival of her 22-year-old daughter, Revell, who boarded the train to Sydney. The journey takes just 2 hours. A mother waits, anticipating her daughter, an extraordinarily beautiful blonde with blue eyes, tall and slender, to flutter onto the platform and embrace her. Revelle Balmain lives in the prestigious Sydney suburb of Bellevue Hill, not far from the city center. She is a model and a dancer. She had planned to visit her parents before a work trip to Japan, where her troupe awaited her for their 4th tour. But there is much that Jan doesn't know about her daughter, and on this November day, Revell does not disembark in Newcastle. Traces of her short life are scattered across Sydney's streets, including items intended to accompany her to Japan, a journey she will never make. 22-year-old Revelle Balmain was close to realizing her dream. As a professional dancer, she had already visited Japan on 3 concert tours and eagerly anticipated her 4th trip. She supplemented her income by modeling, appearing in magazine spreads and product advertisements. Just a few days later, a new issue of a popular Australian magazine featuring Revell on the cover was scheduled for release, an esteemed accomplishment for a model. Additionally, 4 weeks ago, Revell met a promising 27-year-old director named Piers Fisher-Pollard. Young, beautiful, and talented, Revell had high expectations for life, and it seemed like her entire life lay ahead of her. Revell started dancing at the age of 3. She adored music, jazz, and tap dancing. During her teenage years, she spent a year in a theater school in Britain. However, upon returning from her first concert tour, she realized that performing on stage was her true calling. Unfortunately, it didn't pay as well as she'd hoped, so she juggled dancing with modeling jobs. But even that wasn't enough to cover her bills. Therefore, she decided to improve her financial situation by offering her services to an escort agency. Many girls work in this field for a very short time, facing difficulties, and she was one of them. Much later, Revell's mother would state that her daughter's decision shocked her family. She had grown up in a loving family, always supportive of their children, and if financial troubles arose, she could have turned to them. The woman speculated that the deeply hidden reason for this decision might have been related to an incident when Revell was 4 years old and found her 1.5-year-old brother Matthew floating in the pool. He couldn't be saved, and it was very difficult for her parents to recover from this. Perhaps Revell never managed to overcome it. Nevertheless, in November 1994, Revell's boyfriend, family, and most of her friends had no idea about her side job. Saturday, November 5th, 1994, was supposed to be her last day working in escort services. At some point, her life took a turn, but after 6 weeks of leading a double life, she was returning to her true love and passion, dance. The day before, she had lunch with her friend Kate Brentnall, who described her as happier than she had ever been. She was very excited about her trip to Japan. Revell had dyed her hair to a softer, more natural blonde. I thought it was symbolic. I thought she had never looked more beautiful. Sadly, that journey would never take place, because the next evening she disappeared under highly suspicious circumstances. Revell spent Saturday morning with Piers. In the short time they had been dating, they had become inseparable. However, suddenly Piers developed an intense headache, forcing them to go to the hospital. After seeing the doctor, Revell suggested having lunch, but Piers declined due to his migraine. Around noon, he escorted her to a bus stop. Revell headed to the city center while Piers preferred to lie down. At that time, Revell was working for 2 different escort agencies. One of them was managed by Jane Stanojevic and Zoran Stanojevic. As her boyfriend, Piers, couldn't spend time with her, Revell called Jane and Zoran's escort agency to inform them that she was available. The administrator replied that she had a 2-hour booking from 4 p.m. It was for a new client, a young man named Gavin Samer, who lived in the eastern suburb of Sydney called Kingsford. Later at 10 p.m., she had another appointment with friends of Zoran from Serbia. Zoran was eager to please his friends and suggested having her accompany them to the hotel because he wanted to offer them the most beautiful girl. Revell arrived at Gavin Samer's house with a bottle of champagne as requested by Gavin. She was wearing cork wedge shoes, a long skirt, and a tunic. She had a pager. During that time, there were no mobile phones, so escort agencies handed pagers to the girls, sending them messages as new orders came in. At 3:50 p.m., Revell used Gavin's phone to call the administrator and let them know she had arrived. This was a way for the girl to signal that she felt comfortable at the client's house and that everything was fine. 2 hours later, at 5:50 p.m., she called the administrator again and said the meeting was over and she was leaving, but there was no need to send a driver for her. However, as Gavin later revealed, she didn't leave, but instead arranged to spend an extra hour with him for additional payment. This was a risky practice because the owners of the escort agencies did not approve and sometimes punished the girls for such side jobs, naturally because they didn't receive their share of the profit. While she was with Gavin, her boyfriend Pierce messaged her, feeling much better. She told him she lay down to rest. Pierce easily believed this as he had no suspicion about her side job. At 7 p.m., she received a message on her pager from her friend Kate Brittle. 15 minutes later, Revell called back and let her friend know she couldn't talk, but would call from home in an hour after changing. And then they would have a couple of beers together at the Royal Hotel, a popular pub in Sydney. Afterward, she planned to meet Pierce. The sun set that day at 7:25 p.m., according to Gavin. That was the last time he saw Revell when he dropped her off at the nearest pub, the Tomato Inn. He pulled up to the pub, she got out of the car, said goodbye, and entered through the back door. Gavin then went to a store for cigarettes and cider before heading home, watching TV, and going to bed. At 7:53 p.m., Revell's boyfriend Pierce sent her another message on her pager, but she didn't reply. By this time, Pierce had met their mutual friend Zoe. They were visiting different bars in the city, and Pierce constantly messaged Revell on her pager so she'd know where to find them. The last time he attempted to contact her was at 2:30 a.m. Then he went home to sleep. She didn't respond to any of his messages. On the following day, November 6th, Revell's mother, Jen Balmain, stood on the railway platform in Newcastle, awaiting the arrival of the train from Sydney, on which her daughter was supposed to arrive. Revell's parents were eagerly anticipating their daughter's arrival to have a sort of farewell celebratory dinner, to catch up, chat, share the latest news before she was due to embark on a 2-week rehearsal in Brisbane, followed by her troupe's upcoming 4-month tour in Japan. The train arrived, but Revell wasn't on it. Jen assumed that her daughter might have missed the early morning train and waited for the next one. However, Revell still didn't appear. As time passed, Jen realized that something was amiss. She returned home and immediately made phone calls. She contacted her daughter's friend, the apartment neighbor, and hospitals in Sydney, trying to ascertain her whereabouts. When Revell's apartment neighbor informed Jen that Revell's room still had an almost fully packed suitcase with her belongings, passport, and ticket to Japan, Jen realized it was time to involve the police. Jen, along with Revell's apartment neighbor and her boyfriend Pierce, reported Revell missing. However, the police were not swift in commencing an investigation, despite the discovery of Revell's belongings scattered throughout the Kingsford area, where her last client, Gavin Seymour, resided. Her bag, cosmetics, diary, credit cards, and keys to the Bellevue Hill apartment were found strewn across different streets. One of her high heels was found in a trash bin, while the other was discovered in a nearby block. The plastic casing of her pager was lying in a gutter. On the 5th day after the girl's disappearance, when everything indicated an unfortunate event involving Revell, the police started their investigation. Initially, they explored the version that Revell was abducted on the streets of Kingsford, with the abductor throwing her belongings out of the car window while driving. Wild rumors circulated, suggesting she might have been abducted at the request of an Arabian prince and taken to Saudi Arabia. However, the police attempted to investigate more realistic scenarios. Pierce was the first to be excluded from the list of suspects. Investigators considered the possibility that he might have learned about the girl's double life and became so furious that he killed Revell. However, when informed about her side jobs, it was a double blow for the young man. He had an alibi for the evening of her disappearance, and apart from her family, a few friends, and her roommate, he was one of the few people who insisted on continuing the investigation, demanding a more serious approach to the case. Next in line as a suspect was Gavin. Several suspicious moments arose in his story. He recounted that on that Saturday, when he decided to engage the services of the escort agency, his girlfriend, Michelle, had left home to visit her family. He hired Revell and paid her $500 for 3 hours. To pay Revell, he pawned Michelle's clarinet and received $250 for it. Additionally, he won $150 at slot machines in the Tomato Inn pub. This summed up to $400. He paid this in cash and another $100 to Revell by check. However, the pub staff couldn't recall cashing out his winnings, and he allegedly lost his family's checkbook. Even in the store where he bought cigarettes and cider, there were no records corresponding to the man's claims. His girlfriend Michelle was, of course, questioned. She flew from Brisbane to Sydney 2 days after Revelle's disappearance. Gavin met her at the airport, and she immediately noticed scratches on Gavin's chest and neck. There was also a mark on his finger, as if from a bite. The police also noticed these wounds, but Gavin couldn't explain where they came from, whether from surfing activities or gardening. Michelle also pointed out that Gavin cleaned his car and folded the rear seats, although she added that he often turned the car into a mess, then cleaned it to accommodate his surfboard. Additionally, her incredibly lazy boyfriend laundered the bedding and hung it out to dry just before her arrival. She found it suspicious, but it likely indicated his attempt to hide infidelity rather than criminal activity. Unfortunately, due to the lack of evidence, the police couldn't even conclusively prove that a crime had occurred. The Revell parents were determined to seek justice for their daughter, but no one was arrested or charged with anything. A member of the Revell family claimed that the police considered Revell's life less valuable because she was promiscuous. Hence, they half-heartedly conducted the investigation. Gavin's house was searched not immediately after the girl's disappearance, and even then, it was done without a warrant. It was more of a cursory inspection. Gavin's car was checked for DNA and other evidence only after 10 days. Many crucial witnesses were not interviewed and evidence was not gathered. Naturally, the investigation stalled, and there were no developments in it for several years. Only in 1999, after an active campaign by the public, media, and the girl's relatives, did interest in the case resurface, and it was reviewed by the coroner. The detective who led the initial investigation told the coroner that, in the police's opinion, Gavin was the prime suspect in the case. Even Gavin's lawyer, Seymour, was forced to agree that his client was the sole suspect. Gavin worked for the girl's parents' company and at the time was an attractive, successful young man. Additionally, he was quite athletic as he loved surfing. Gavin lived with his girlfriend, Michelle, but when she went to visit her family, he decided to hire an escort. Gavin was the last person seen with Revell. According to him, she spent an additional hour with him before he dropped her off at the Red Tomato Inn, a pub in Kingsford. He parked his car in the back. Revell exited the car, said goodbye, and walked inside through the back door. He then went to a store and headed home. However, nobody at the pub who was present at that time could recall seeing Revell. The owner explicitly stated that they had a different crowd that evening, and if such a girl had entered the pub, everyone would have noticed. Despite Gavin purchasing cider at the store, no one remembered this. In other words, after Revell's last call to her friend from Gavin's house at 7:15 p.m., nothing from Gavin's account was officially confirmed. Moreover, Michelle, now his ex-girlfriend, told the coroner in 1999 that she called Gavin that evening but got no answer. After several attempts, she finally got through at 9:22 p.m. and he sounded agitated. His other ex-girlfriend, who had been involved with him before, stated that after drinking, he could become aggressive and hit her in the face. This raised suspicions further, especially because Gavin had been drinking on Saturday throughout the day and had at least consumed half a bottle of champagne brought by Revell. However, one witness, a young man named Jeremy Coughlin, offered a completely different scenario of what might have happened to Revell. Jeremy was a friend of one of Revell's wealthiest clients, Mark Colton. Jeremy recounted that he and Mark were at a party when, after a few drinks, Mark abruptly said, "Aren't people stupid? Have you heard about Revelle Balmain? First, there were rumors about an Arab prince who took her to Saudi Arabia. Nonsense. She's at a depth of 3 meters, and nobody will find her body. That's what you get for deceiving the brothel you work for. The brothel owner wanted her dead because she was damaging his business." Jeremy asked his friend about Mark's relationship with Revell, and he replied that he met her outside the brothel, paying her between $500 to $1,000 a week, which was cheaper than paying the agency $200 per hour. When Mark Colton was questioned, he denied saying anything like that, but he indeed had heard rumors that agencies were threatening employees who saw clients privately. Owners of the agency were also questioned. It turned out that on Revell's last day working at the escort agency, she owed Jane and Zoran money, around $300. However, as explained by Jane, this wasn't considered unusual. While most clients pay with credit cards, some prefer cash, and at the end of each week, the girls in the agency reconcile who owes what to whom. According to Jane, Revell was planning to repay the money owing to a meeting with Zoran's friends scheduled for 10 p.m. However, Zoran claimed he was unaware of such an agreement. In fact, his words contradicted those of his wife on almost every point. Jane described that on the day the girl disappeared, she and Zoran bought a television, had pizza at a pizzeria around 5 p.m., and went home. She didn't work that night because she was heavily pregnant and tired. However, Zoran told the police he didn't work on the evening of the girl's disappearance, literally saying, "No, not on Saturday." He claimed he took the TV to the office, installed it, and returned home around 7 p.m. Yet, 4 years later, during the coroner's inquest, he stated that by saying, "No, not on Saturday," he meant not during the day on Saturday. In reality, he did work that evening and returned home around 2 a.m. He blamed the misunderstanding on the translator. However, later, a linguistic expert confirmed that the original statements of the man were translated correctly. Regardless, Zoran claimed he did not see Revell that night. As the agency's driver, he picked up another girl, Kelly, at 7:15 p.m. He took her to meet his friends at Royal Hotel Park in Darling Harbour, where he waited for 2 hours before driving her to another appointment at the Sheraton Airport Hotel. When he was taking the girl home, he had a flat tire, which he had to fix himself. For 4 years following the girl's disappearance and before the case was considered by the coroner, the police did not interview either Zoran's Serbian friends, who had long since left for Belgrade, or Kelly, Revell's colleague, who provided Zoran's alibi. Partly this was because when Jane Stanojevic gave her initial statement in 1994, she said that Revell was supposed to meet the Serbians at the Swiss Grand Hotel in Bondi. After 4 years, she claimed she had made a mistake and actually meant the Park Royal Hotel in Darling Harbour. It wasn't until 1999 that the police checked the registration records of both hotels, finding no information about the Serbians in either. Only after Zoran's testimony did the police locate Kelly, who reluctantly corroborated his words. However, when the police checked the Sheraton Hotel records, they couldn't find evidence of Kelly or her client being there. Gavin Seymour, the lawyer, was puzzled as to why the girl was miraculously found only now, why she wasn't questioned 4 years ago, and why the police didn't investigate inconsistencies between Zoran's and his wife's statements, which couldn't even agree on whether he was working on November 5th, 1994. In response to all these questions, the chief investigator who led the initial investigation said that he didn't know. The Revell family was deeply upset by what they heard during the coroner's inquest. The police failed to interview many crucial witnesses, and other witnesses, of course, had long forgotten what they had seen over such a period of time. Their lawyer stated that the girl's parents were treated as a nuisance, despite their only desire being to know what happened to their daughter. Didn't they deserve that? Even the coroner was forced to agree that the initial investigation wasn't as thorough as it should have been. After examining the case, the coroner dismissed the theory that Revell staged her own disappearance because there was no evidence to support it. After all, if she wanted to disappear, the timing was extremely inconvenient. She was already planning an extended trip to Japan and would have returned to pursue her career as a model and dancer with renewed vigor, making her short stint as a call girl forgettable. Additionally, her personal life seemed perfect. She and Piers were crazy about each other, and there was nothing indicating that she wanted to run away. On May 28, 1999, the coroner ruled that Revell was murdered on November 5, 1994, by an unknown person or persons. He noted that there wasn't sufficient evidence against the police's main suspect, Gavin Seymour. However, if his name had been hidden from the public eye until then, now everyone knew who was considered the prime suspect in the case. Before the coroner ruled that Revell was murdered, the police had no body or evidence to work with. It was only in 2008 that detectives from the cold case unit sent forensic experts to Gavin's house, due to advancements in technology. Subsequently, detectives went to Tasmania to question Gavin, but he refused to provide DNA. Gavin, once a successful young man, moved to Tasmania and worked as a chef due to being essentially accused without trial of Revell's murder. He led a very secluded life, drank heavily, and hardly interacted with locals. After spending 15 years there, he returned to Sydney in 2018. He only spoke to a journalist once, explaining that the case had cost him job opportunities and felt as though he was punished without being proven guilty. He knew people considered him guilty, but he claimed innocence. In reality, he was more preoccupied with how the case affected him than Revell and her loved ones. However, he stated he didn't kill Revell. He was only guilty of hiring a call girl that day. Revell's parents passed away without receiving answers about their daughter. What happened to her? Who killed her and why? Her sister still hopes the case will progress. Over the years, she searched for her sister's body. Now, she seeks answers. She needs to know who killed Revell. It seems her prayers were answered because in 2021, a new phase of the investigation began. The police announced a reward of $1 million for information leading to Revell's killer's arrest. Additionally, Jane King, former owner of the escort agency and Zoran's ex-wife, made an incredible statement. She said she never thought Gavin Seymour could be involved in Revell's disappearance. However, she now had new evidence supporting Gavin's truth, evidence that would help clear his name, but was not found by the police conducting the initial investigation. Essentially, his whereabouts that evening were confirmed. That's all she could disclose at the moment. This new information turned the investigation upside down. In fact, a series of new facts were discovered in the case, crucial enough to be presented to the coroner in February next year. Yes, it took almost 30 years, but the police identified clear contradictions that shifted the entire focus of the investigation. While old evidence still needs testing with new technologies, the new investigation is focused on Jane's ex-husband Zoran and his constantly changing story. He was one of the main drivers for the company, transporting girls to clients. However, there were always discrepancies in the statements he gave to the police. During the initial interrogation, 10 days after Revell's disappearance, he claimed he wasn't working that night, but was at home with his wife. In 1999, he admitted to being at work, but his new version of events still didn't align because the evidence crucial to his alibi was not found. Revell was supposed to meet Zoran's Serbian friends at 10 p.m., but for some reason, the police never questioned them. Incredibly, in 2021, an anonymous call was made to an organization called Crime Stoppers regarding this man, in the photo, who could be involved in the crime. This likely refers to Bojan Prevolovic, Zoran's friend and Revell's last presumed client. While Jane King never met her husband's friend, she now knows that Zoran arranged something for him the day after the girl's disappearance. He bought a ticket from Australia to Thailand. Essentially, the man Revell was supposed to meet that evening left the country the very next day after her disappearance, and no one bothered to inquire about the reason for such haste or coincidence. In December 2021, a raid was conducted on Zoran's property, revealing cannabis worth $400,000 and exclusive items valued at $150,000. He faced 36 charges and was denied bail. Most importantly, according to the police, the raids were carried out based on information obtained during the new investigation into Revelle Balmain's disappearance and presumed murder. A detective explicitly stated they were investigating Zoran's involvement in the crime. However, if Zoran's behavior appears unusual, no less suspicious are the actions of Jane King herself. On the day Revell disappeared, she and Zoran had lunch at a pizza place. The next morning, upon learning that Revell wasn't answering calls or messages, Jane immediately dialed the pizza place's number. A staff member recalls her being in a panic, as if it were crucial for her to secure an alibi. She allegedly said to the staff member, "The police are investigating a murder. Can you confirm that we were at your restaurant?" Jane denies phrasing it this way. She insists she said disappearance. But regardless of whether she said murder or disappearance, why was she in such a hurry to confirm her alibi on the very day Revell, a grown 22-year-old woman, had disappeared just a few hours ago? Where did this rush come from? Why was she so certain that Revell simply missed her last evening order, given that such occurrences had been noted before? Jane King herself hadn't even called the police at that point. Likely, nobody had yet contacted the police, and certainly, nobody was conducting an investigation. It seems she was certain that she would be asked where she was that day. One can't help but suspect that Jane and Zoran know more than they want to reveal. At the very least, people who definitely knew where Revell was that evening, apart from her last client, were the escort agency administrator, Jane King, and Zoran Stanovic. The new police investigation leading to the second coroner's inquest, planned for early next year, is in defiance of the apparent difficulties posed by the time elapsed since Revelle Balmain's disappearance. However, it currently promises the greatest hope that this dreadful case will be solved. Today, detectives are closer than ever to capturing her killer.